thank you everybody for coming this evening. It's a hot day. I understand the Giants are competing with this event, so for those of you who are showing your allegiance to good public discourse versus good public baseball, thanks for being here.
Wow.
Want to do a quick introduction for our MC for this evening, and also tell you a little bit about the sponsorship for this program. My name is Peter Cohen, and I'm with the Council of Community Housing Organizations. My colleague Fernando Marti is actually on the panel this evening. We've been part of an effort to put together, if you will, a kind of a progressive think tank for San Francisco. And it comes now under the brand name of Urban Idea, the Urban Institute for Economic and Development Alternatives. And this event, this forum tonight, is one of a series of forums, panel discussions we've been having over the last about a year and a half, fairly successfully. This is our third and final for 2014, and in 2015 we will again have about a quarterly series of topics, maybe even about Proposition M, because if you've been reading the papers, there's a lot of action on Prop M. We think it's time to have a conversation here about that rather than at the City Club, which is where the next one's going to be. In any case, I just want to do some quick thank you to a small but mighty group of folks who have been a steering committee for Urban Idea and trying to move this enterprise along, these forums and some other ideas around research. Kind of a progressive think tank takes building infrastructure, and right now that infrastructure is being built by people who've really volunteered their time. Carl Beitel is here, Tim Redmond is here, Rachel Brzezinski, Fernando and myself, Calvin Welch, Mario Didia. I'm forgetting someone, pardon me. And it's the kind of thing that we're all committed to, but hopefully you're getting a lot out of it, and thanks for supporting us. And then lastly, thanks to the LGBT Center, it's very generously given us a nice rate on using this room, and it's a nice space. This evening we have Shasan Liu, who's going to be emceeing, moderating, setting up the program. So at this point I just want to turn it over to her, and thank you all again for coming.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening. How are we doing tonight? All right. So we're competing with baseball. And we're here because we have an amazing lineup of speakers. Hope everyone was able to sign in at the door and grab a program. We're actually not going to go into the bios of each person who's going to be talking tonight, because that would take all evening. So we'll let you read about them. My name is Shasan. I'm with the Chinese Progressive Association, and we're part of Progressive Workers Alliance and San Francisco Rising. And it's my pleasure and honor to moderate the panel this evening. I just wanted to open it up by, we don't have to say too much about, you're here because you know we're in a crisis in San Francisco, right? I want to just actually see how many folks here actually live in San Francisco. All right. So how many folks here have actually seen their rent go up or had pressures to move out from where they're living because of what's happening in San Francisco? How many folks know folks who've been evicted or facing leaving San Francisco? Okay. And how many folks here identify as a progressive? All right. And how many folks here identify as being an organizer? All right, right on, cool. Just trying to get a sense of who's in the room here tonight. So I don't have to tell you, everyone here knows that we're in a crisis moment here in San Francisco. The way that the housing crisis is hitting our communities, it just takes walking down any one of these neighborhood streets to see the changes that have been happening really fast in our city, and the numbers of people that have been forced out. And we'll hear some more statistics later about what's been happening to the demographic shifts in San Francisco. Also, just to put a little context on tonight, we're talking about San Francisco, but this is not just an issue that San Francisco is facing, right? The kinds of pressures, the growing gap between rich and poor, we may be leading the pack, San Francisco being the fastest growing inequality in the entire country. We're leading the pack, but there's a pack, right? It's happening across the country, across the world, and we're here 5 years out from the Wall Street meltdown, 3 years out from when Occupy Wall Street first took this to the streets, and about maybe 5 days into an unprecedented, resistance movement in Hong Kong for, students and people reacting to some of the economic pressures and the call for democracy. So there's a lot going on in the world that shapes what we're talking about here today. And just to move on into what we're doing tonight, we're going to hear first from Fernando Martí, the co-director of Council of Community Housing. Sorry, I always call you so. Council of Community Housing. And Fernando's going to give us a brief overview of what's at stake in this November's election. And then we're going to hear from Professor Rachel Brahinsky, who's going to walk us through some of the major shifts that are happening with the demographics and vote electorate here in San Francisco. And then we're going to have a discussion with Maria Poblet, Executive Director of Causa Justa Just Cause, and Neil Gorenflow, who is the co-founder of Shareable, an online magazine about sharing. And we're going to have a lively conversation about what these shifts mean for San Francisco. What is our vision for what we're trying to do as a progressive community around the future of San Francisco? What are some of the opportunities and new emerging possibilities for building alliances and organizing a stronger movement? And what are some of the pitfalls and challenges that we're facing? And we'll leave all of you with a call to action and ways to plug in. So how does that sound for tonight? Sound good? All right. So we're going to get right into it and have Fernando start us off.
Thanks, Jason. So to introduce talking about what is up in this November 2014, I just wanted to start with what it takes to win in San Francisco, which has been for a long time building broad alliances across very different groups. Winning rent control in 1979, winning district elections, winning growth controls that linked downtown development to actually paying for the impacts that it created, whether it was transportation or others, up to the 2000 progressive sweeps that really transformed our Board of Supervisors, required bringing together very diverse sets of political players in San Francisco, from organized labor, and in particular the service and hotel unions, to communities organized in communities of color, to tenant organizations, to neighborhood associations. And that's sort of the context for how we have, since the late 70s, been able to move progressive politics in San Francisco. Throughout an economy and in a shifting landscape of, as Chasan said, of booms and busts. From the downtown office boom of the 1980s to the recession of 1990 to the dot-com boom that ended in a bust in 2000 to the housing bubble that ended in a financial meltdown of 2008 to the tech boom that ended in yet to be determined to come. I think one of the things that is then unique about 2014 is the level of economic disparity that San Francisco has come to represent that is unique in the entire country, and in particular has reached unique proportions in San Francisco itself through that history, where we are now the city with the highest income disparity, where that income disparity has risen the fastest, but where it also means that despite sort of going down Valencia Street or going to Dolores Park and you see this transformation and you think, oh my God, the city has been completely transformed into a city of only the wealthy. In fact, our median income has continued to rise at a slow pace, because what has in fact been happening is that we are continuing to grow in workers and residents who work in the hotels, in the restaurants, in that entire service industry that is part and parcel of the tech economy. In that last few years, we've seen a series of reactionary wins. Care Not Cash, which propelled a certain politician to be mayor. Sit Lie, which has propelled a certain other politician to be supervisor of this district. At the same time that despite kind of national trends for the last 30 years, a deepening trend toward austerity and neoliberal policies, San Francisco has continued to put progressive taxation measures before the electorate and has continued to win, with some of the some examples being the transfer taxes that put taxes on luxury developments that won in 2008 and again in 2009. So we are a city that, as an electorate, has not bought into the politics of austerity, I would like to think. So, 2014, I think in some ways we're seeing the culmination of a lot of effort and work that have been going on for the last decade maybe, if not several decades, in, for example, Prop G. So who has not heard of Prop G? Okay. So I'm going to talk about a couple of I think, what are some of the keystone propositions that are going to be on the ballot this November, and then in Q&A we can talk about some of the other ones, but G, J, and K. And I think one related to G is a particular piece that is a piece of legislation that has become kind of a limelight around the new economy, which is the short-term rental legislation that's currently being heard at the Board of Supervisors. And then one a race for assembly seat that might really transform what progressive politics looks like at the Board of Supervisors for the next few years. So Prop G, the way that we have responded to the eviction crisis on a number of levels has been the way we usually start, by organizing at the base. And so the reaction to the wave of evictions, the wave of Ellis Act evictions, resulted in a series of tenant conventions, neighborhood by neighborhood, through the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014, and culminating in a tenant convention that was a packed house at a school in the Tenderloin, over 600 people, coming up with an electoral and legislative agenda for this year and the next few years to come. And at the top of that agenda was stopping speculation, stopping the flipping of houses that is the primary determinant, or at least the primary connection to where Ellis Act evictions are happening. We know that 75% of, or 50%, majority of Ellis Act evictions happen within the first year of a house being bought by a new landlord. The majority of those actually happen within the first 6 months. And the narrative is, it's not the landlord who suddenly decided that we've got this new economy and I'm going to get really greedy and I'm going to evict the tenant who I've had in my house for 10 years or 20 years, although that happens, and we see those cases. But it is the new buyer whose sole purpose in buying the property isn't necessarily to move into that property, but to buy it as a rent-controlled apartment building of 3 or 4 units in which the selling price is based on that building being a rent-controlled building, clearing out the building by any way possible, and then reselling within a few years. So Prop G, which is on the ballot, is a tax on resales of property within 5 years, and then it goes down to 0. It is a campaign that is almost entirely volunteer-run, a grassroots campaign that at last count was facing $600,000 and will probably reach $1 million in opposition to that campaign, if not more.
$2 million now. The National Association of Realtors just put in $1 million today, so we're going to be at about $2 million.
All right, so we've got 1 million volunteers who are going to walk precincts every Saturday against $2 million in financing. A separate piece that is on the ballot is Proposition K, which is, we're calling the housing balance, although it's got a different name now and it's sort of negotiated outcome. But it's a proposition that partly came out of the tenant convention, but has actually been something that has been in the works for the last 6 years or decade in South of Market. And I think there's folks here who were at the roots of what was at that time called boom-proof zoning. How do we link market rate development to affordable housing? If part of the narrative of how a city changes, and part of what we know is that as the city changes, as this city changes, and as that income gap continues, we still have a majority of low-income workers who need housing, who do not have that housing provided by the market. How do we provide at least a minimum amount of housing for those folks versus the housing that the market is building? Supply and demand is not meeting and will not meet that long range of demand. And as Tim is somewhere around here, reported recently, most of that actual market rate housing isn't even going to tech workers. It's going to global investors who are keeping pied-à-terres in San Francisco and not even living or occupying in those buildings that are supposedly being built to meet the local demand. Prop K almost became a contentious battle, a referendum on the mayor. even though what was legally allowed in terms of a linkage was a conditional use, which is something that sets up some stumbling blocks for market rate development, but doesn't actually stop it. What we ended up with was a commitment to building a third of our housing as affordable housing, a dashboard or accounting method that sets up the conditions for creating this linkage in the future, and a commitment to building into new zoning the funds, the sites, and the land use controls that will actually meet that 1/3. Prop J is the last of these sort of what I see as 3 progressive working class pieces that has also been in the works and has residents nationwide as fast food workers, Walmart workers, workers in restaurants and in grocery stores have been fighting for $15 an hour as a minimum wage nationwide. And San Francisco is now set by having built a coalition across progressive labor unions and low-wage worker centers, the ability to get to a $15 minimum wage that will be the strongest in the nation if it wins in November. So those are sort of, I think, 3 of the pieces that are likely to set an agenda for progressive politics in the future. One more piece within that, though, and that relates directly to Prop G, is all of the characters and political actors, I guess, involved with Proposition G have also been involved in the fight around the hotelization of San Francisco properties, of turning our apartments into short-term rentals. And part of why I really wanted Neil here was to have a discussion around what sharing and shareable means when sharing is being used by large corporations as a way to extract profits. And so, as you all know, and I don't know, has anyone here put out their unit or their apartment building on Airbnb or another short-term rental? Am I going to out myself as the only one who has actually done this? Okay, I am guilty. I'm guilty. Not doing it anymore, but I have been guilty. So I know. And so today I went on Airbnb to check out what it takes to put out a one room shared in a hosted house. The first set of listings came at the low end, a $70 unit, and at the high end, $200 for a bedroom, just a bedroom. So this is, comparable to hotel rooms, which Supervisor Chu has put to a proposal to legalize and regulate so that folks would pay their, I think it's 15% of hotel taxes, but allow this, at least for hosted rentals year-round, and for whole units only 90 days out of the year. And as I did my calculation, and I now have a housemate in that room that was a short-term rental, if I was doing short-term rentals, I would be kicking out that housemate in no time because I would make a lot more money even at 7 days a week, let alone full-time renting out my bedroom in my unit as a hotel. What I think it amounts to in the debate is, I think, in an ideological debate about the terms that we use for the economy that we live in. And using terms like a shared economy or a collaborative economy have, I think, very long and deep roots in San Francisco, as deep as our progressive politics of roots. The roots of 60s hippies, of Ivan Illich coming up with ideas around deschooling our schools and creating tools for conviviality. This was the birthplace of the Whole Earth Catalog. This was where you would go to Rainbow Grocery and find a ride to, some rainbow gathering on a set of 3x5 cards at Rainbow Grocery, right? That was what has now been turned into a way for the Ron Conways of the world, the Amazons, the PayPals to extract profit out of what we do in our daily lives by sharing. So those are the debates that are happening today in San Francisco, some of them on the ballot measures, some of them as legislation. Finally, the last piece that is playing out in this is a very contested race for who will succeed Tom Ammiano in the assembly for this district between Supervisor David Chu and Supervisor David Campos. Within that, I think what Campos is bringing is a history of working on immigrant and legal issues. And what David Chu is bringing is a history of trying to find common ground around some of these complex issues. How this plays out, and so each one is positioning themselves as either the progressive standard bearer or the standard bearer, I don't know if you can be a standard bearer of compromise, but the maker of rational compromise. But within that, whoever wins, the mayor will be selecting a new supervisor for San Francisco and potentially shifting for at least the next 2 years the balance of power for counting to 6 votes for being able to get progressive measures passed legislatively. In a national context, we're seeing cities like New York, like Pittsburgh, like Seattle, like Minneapolis, moving much further to the left than our left coast city has been able to do with the mayor that we currently have and with the board of supervisors that we currently have. And so I think that sets up a question about that current uniqueness of San Francisco. Now, some of those cities have had long-term electoral groupings, such as the Working People's Party in San Francisco, that was a primary mover for getting de Blasio elected. The stuff that Paul Wellstone was able to pull together from progressive wings of the Democratic Party and SEIU and worker centers in Minnesota. To, I think, what Chokwe Lumumba was able to do in Jackson, Mississippi, and being able to, I think, in a sense, reimagine what economic alternatives could look like if you could actually win electoral power. We are far, far from there, and G, J, and K and the Airbnb debates are maybe setting up some of those ideological confrontations, but I think we've got quite a ways to go before we see the kinds of moves that are already happening in other parts of the country. So that's my intro to elections 2014.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause for Fernando. That was a lot of content, right? From the history and the roots of politics in San Francisco through what's on the ballot and what's happening across the country. So with that, let's absorb that for a second and turn the mic over to Professor Rachel Brahinsky to talk a little bit more into what's happening with the demographic shifts and electoral shifts.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's really fun to see so many friends, and thank you to all of my students who came. Some of you didn't have a choice, but I appreciate that you came anyway. It's good to be here. Let's see. Some of what I want to say, Fernando has touched on, and I'll be illustrating. So that's good. I have some pictures for you. So I wanted to just start. First, I have a few words. I swear, I think this is the only slide with words. So there's some words over there. The thing that we're facing, I think what I wanted to bring to the conversation is kind of some big picture thoughts and to encourage everyone to be thinking on multiple scales, to be thinking about the problem that San Francisco faces as a problem that isn't a 49 square mile problem, but as Fernando's already started to talk about, a problem that, we have a national urban crisis actually underway, and the issues that people are struggling with and dealing with the ballot measures that Fernando just outlined are issues that many cities are struggling with. And of course, it all is sort of blanketed by the extreme global inequality that we're dealing with, which in a very, very bringing it home way has pushed, there's a kind of global search for investment. There's a lot of excess capital rolling around, and the way that it's playing out in San Francisco there's at least, and this is a number I think from 2012, at least $8 billion a year in foreign direct investment. That's what that FDI stands for, coming into San Francisco. A lot of it into real estate, and there's more than that in the Bay Area, and California is actually kind of the heart of that too. So we're really at the epicenter of one of the kind of overflow problems of the global inequality crisis. And even though most of the images, in fact, all of the images that I'm going to show you are San Francisco-centric, I think that we can't understand or even really begin to face the challenges that San Francisco has without thinking regionally and without then thinking nationally too. And you know and I think it poses a challenge for organizers to figure out ways to do sort of local cross-border organizing. I know some of that's already happening, and maybe we'll hear about that. But in a sort of big, broad, long-term way, to think of San Francisco as a much larger space than just the city that's represented by our Board of Supervisors. Along the lines of the topic of inequality, so the San Francisco is, as Shah-San said at the beginning, it's the city that has the sort of highest rate of inequality in the country, although I think Atlanta actually should be on this chart. I didn't make this chart. But we have more high net worth people per thousand than any other city in the country. And so one of the things that you see about that's happening with inequality in San Francisco is that it's not just an increasing gap between rich and poor, it's an increasing volume of very, very rich people, sort of super rich. And then there's also the problem that Fernando mentioned, that Tim Redmond's expose is showing, that there's not just super rich people, but there's space kind of held for the super rich too, which I don't know how to demonstrate that on a map, but or in a chart, but that's part of what's happening too. So it's an extreme problem.
Dog spas.
Dog spas?
Dog spas, I think, prove that point. Spas for dogs.
Oh, dog
you know what I mean?
spas,
Yeah.
spas, yes. Doggy spas, we need them. Okay. This is, so I wanted to show you a couple of images. This data doesn't come all the way up to the present, and I'll explain what we're looking at. So this is showing the change in median household income between 2000 and 2009. This is a New York Times, one of those New York Times census maps. And the dark orange areas are places with more than a 20-point increase in median household income in that decade. So what it shows you is that on the east side of town especially, and then in certain pockets, a couple of other pockets, that there's this very dramatic rise in median income. And those parts of town are going to show up again and again in these other maps. Also, so this is another New York Times map, households earning over $200,000. This is 2009, so this would look even, the dark areas, which again are the places where the richest folks are living, those are even darker now, if we could redo this map with more current data. So that's something to think about. So then here, this is these maps from the left corner to the right, this is showing between 1990 and 2012, the change in the number of households with income over $150,000. And so the darker color means that there's more of those households, and so you can see that the city's becoming darker and darker, so to speak, in this way. What else do we have? Oh, all along the same lines. So one of the ways that this is happening, it's not, some San Franciscans are getting wealthier, but there's also a lot of these newcomers, new folks coming in and arriving to take jobs that pay pretty well. So you can see this kind of rising trend from 2007 to 2012 of people arriving with incomes of $75,000 or higher. And so again, the data doesn't come all the way up to this month or even this year on this chart, but I actually was happy to find older data, because one of the things that I think sometimes we forget is how long this has been going on. This isn't a crisis of yesterday, and as Fernando talked about, the organizing on some of these ballot measures has been going on for years. It goes on for a very long time. It's a boom and a bust cycle that this city has seen since, well, I don't want to say gold rush, but there, I just said it, right? So it's a long story, but the current story of the tech boom and the tech capital-related crisis is also a long story. It's not new, even though sometimes it feels like it. Oh, that's a map of venture capital. So I wanted to show, oh wow, and you can't see the states, so it's sort of surreal to look at on this wall. But that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. I like it.
Where's Lawrence?
And this is as of 2013 July. So this is also a slightly changing story. If you were to look at this map for the first tech boom, the San Francisco Bay Area would have way more dots than the rest of the country. This is actually what you're seeing here is venture capital sort of evening out, even though it looks like we're taking most of it, and actually what it is it's about 50% of venture capital, 54%, depends on the moment you're looking at, is coming through the Bay Area. But that's a smaller share than it was before. In the first tech boom, I think it was around 70%. Don't quote me on that number. Look it up before you write it down. But so, of course, I wanted to show you this map as, we often think about the role of, as venture capital as sort of the demon behind the dramatic change, or if you're thinking about the boom times as a good thing, that the venture capital is the driver. Well, it's part of it. Part of why it's so dramatic here is because half of the venture capital in the country is coming through the Bay Area. But there are other things to think about. The foreign direct investment figure that I threw out earlier, $8 billion, that's also really key. What do I have next? Let's see. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if there was another inequality map. And venture capital, I think, ends up being a sort of symbol of what's happening. Although maybe it's a better symbol than I think the other symbol, which is sometimes the people. So often I think people blame folks walking down the street who appear to be techies. I'm not going to say, who knows what people are doing. But and there's a lot of anger, I think, in neighborhoods where there are a lot of new folks coming in and taking tech jobs and moving into housing where people have been evicted. But I do think it's important to think bigger than that. So that, to go beyond the sort of interpersonal person on the sidewalk sort of interaction and think about, what's bringing these jobs here. And then also, Apple and Google are two of the largest corporations in the world. I was trying to figure, it keeps changing every few months. Exxon creeps ahead, and then it's Apple, and then it's Google. And so what we're feeling here isn't just about venture capital. It's also about being kind of in the heartland of, actually, we're sort of the hinterland. Sorry, in San Francisco, we're now the hinterland of the, two of the biggest corporations in the world, based in Silicon Valley, and kind of eating up everything they can eat. So, moving on, that was kind of a weird metaphor, but moving on to the people, or to the people. One of the questions that we had for this panel is, who are these new folks? Where are they living, and how are they going to vote? I don't know how they're going to vote, but I can show you a little bit about some of a few of their characteristics. So, this is a chart of new voter registration by race and ethnicity between January and June of this year. So this is only people who registered to vote between January and June of this year. That's the blue line. The green line is a sort of compilation of people who voted in most of the last 6 important elections. And so what it shows, by race anyway, is that there's a larger share of new voters who are white, so about 85% of these newly registered voters are white, whereas among the pool of voters, typically it's about 61%, 62% white. A much smaller share than usual is Asian and Pacific Islander, so about 6% versus about 28, 27% typically. So that's a big. This is in San Francisco only, and it's only, so this isn't all new people who've moved here, it's just new registered voters between January and June, so through the last election. So that's one thing we know about some of the new folks. This is a little hard to look at, I'll talk you through it. So this is pulling from the voter file new registered voters since a series of elections. So the purple is since November 2008, the green is since 2010, The red is since 2012, and then the blue is that same blue line that you saw a minute ago of the first 6 months or so of 2014. And again, by race and ethnicity. So it's actually what you see is that it's this most recent wave is very different from the group of people that's been registering over the last several years, and is also very different from typical voters in typical elections. Will these new people vote? I don't know, but they registered. So they're more white, and they're less Asian, and they're less Latino, and they're less African American. That's the kind of general trend. Oh, and some of them are also pretty young. So this chart is sort of terrible to look at, but but it makes the point. So the one number on here that I thought was significant to point out is that in District 5, there is a large share of new voters who are under 40. So, and this is all of the voters here on this chart are under 40. But that's sort of the spot where you're sort of, so it's younger people and whiter people, if people can be whiter. Where are they? That's where they are. So this is that same pool of people, the newly registered voters between January and June of just this year. So it's about 18,000 people. And the darker areas is where they're more densely populated. The numbers are pretty small, though. You'll see the really dark areas like Mission Bay. That means that between 82 and 146 people are there. So it's not percentage, it's actual numbers. So these are where new voters are registering. Now, are they new to town? Now, I'm not certain, right? We don't know if they're new to town, but they very possibly are. Except I noticed there's a darker area by the Panhandle. It looks like Hank has been doing a voter drive. That's a Calvin Welch joke. He's not here, I think. Anyway, I was trying to figure out, why are more people registering up there? I don't know. But so there's new registered voters in those darker areas, which is interesting from an organizing perspective. And then, okay, so I just have two more maps, and it's just, the last two maps are maps that show what the vote looked like in the last mayoral election, to sort of turn to the question of progressive, not progressive, or whatever in between. So the dark colors went more for Ed Lee. So Ed Lee's got this sort of, I was gonna call it a donut. He's got like a C shape. He's got the crescent. He has a crescent of San Francisco. And then the Avalos vote was sort of tucked into the center of the crescent. What I probably should have done is also then mapped those newly registered voters right next to this. We could flip back and forth and you could look, but you all can sort of remember too. Or I can go back and show some of those pictures. Basically, I think my purpose is to give just a little bit of a visual and a little bit of a sense of some of the change that's happening. There's a lot that we don't have our hands on yet. And again, as I said, if we're going to think regionally, which I think we have to, about how to tackle a housing crisis, I should be showing you maps that include the East Bay, that include Silicon Valley, and show kind of the flow of people. So we'll do that next time. But I think I want to go to a blank screen. Okay, good. I think that the place I want to end, I guess just to come back to the idea that as we're talking about how to face this election and face organizing, I hope we're also thinking not just broadly about national problems and about urban problems on a national global scale, but also kind of beyond November. And so I think even though we've framed this as a conversation about November and what it means, that of course we have to be thinking about intersections between electoral politics and other kinds of politics and kind of long-term organizing. I think that's where I'm going to stop. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. Wow, anybody else find that fascinating, those maps? Pretty amazing, right? Who wants to go back to school now? You're already in school. All right, so that was pretty, that was a lot of information. Looking at what's happening to the city and really thinking of the both the history of the economic cycles, the history of the progressive electorate and the activism that has shaped San Francisco till now. You know, all this is the context, right, for what we're going to do in the next few months to the elections, and then to Rachel's point, beyond November, right? So we're going to just turn now to the whole panel and have Neil and Maria join the conversation. So given this sort of backdrop and context that has been laid out by Fernando and Rachel, the first question we wanted to sort of dive into is really to have each of the panelists sort of comment on what do you feel are the sort of key impacts of these demographic shifts, of all these things that are happening? What are the maybe 2 or 3 key sort of impacts that you think we need to be thinking about as a progressive community? And then, this is a 2-part question, okay? So then the second part is being people who are all working for the future of San Francisco and who are looking to change the future of San Francisco, everyone on this panel, given the impacts that you are seeing of the demographic shifts, what is your vision for San Francisco 20 years from now? What do you see where we are right now? We just heard where we've come from. Where do you want to see San Francisco go in 20 years from now? And it could be about the demographics, the economy, housing, transportation, whatever is, you know, what you're focusing on. But I'm only going to give you each 3 minutes to answer both those questions. So it's got to be, you know, just hit the highlights for us, okay? All right, so let's start with, have Maria kick it off?
Sure.
Is that cool?
Sure. I feel like I should say something about the work I do. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Sorry, so yeah, we'll have them introduce themselves.
Yeah. I'm involved at Causa Justa, Just Cause. Has anybody heard of our work? Yeah? Okay, good. Good. We're a grassroots community-based organization formed out of the merger of a Latino organization with 30 years history in the Mission District in San Francisco and an organization in the African American community in Oakland that put the first tenant protection on the ballot. And 10 years after that measure got on, we merged because we thought that building Black and brown unity in the neighborhoods that are most impacted by displacement and gentrification could not only save our homes, but it could actually rebuild a social movement in the United States, which we think long-term is actually what's going to save all of us, and some of the people who will fall flying from the next bubble and be like, whoa, maybe you were right. We'll be like, come on in. Well, some of us, some people will be like, told you so. I told you so, and I blogged about it. We want to build a movement much bigger than any one organization, any one community, and our contribution to it is to bring together the voice, the agenda, the political vision of Black and Latino families that are the most impacted by displacement. Because one of the myths out there is that you need a technocrat to solve the problems, and we think you sure do need technocrats, and also you need grandmas and moms and uncles and babysitters, and they actually have ideas about how to solve the problems in our society. So I'll leave. We have 3,500 members, and we just started a program in Antioch with displaced African Americans from Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose to build a regional scale of organizing that is needed to address the regional scale of the problem. I'll stop there on that. But so what do we see with the electorate? I don't like to be the harbinger of doom, but it does suck. I think that's the technical term. That San Francisco has lost more than 50% of its African American population is not just an issue of diversity and you don't get to eat cornbread, because you probably do, it just costs a lot more and is sold to you by white people. But it's also that you lose the most progressive electorate in any city, in any country, on any issue, which is African American voters, particularly Black women. And that is impacting the politics of this city. Many of us were drawn to this city because of its progressive politics. And some people think, well, it's just a bubble. It's not a bubble. It came from decades of movement building, campaigns that were won, like the one Fernando mentioned, and accountability that politicians had to an organized base of communities of color that had a vision for progressive change. That's what we're losing as gentrification reshapes the electorate. There's always opportunities, there's always ways to build alliances, but if we pretend that that's not true, we're not going to be able to really solve the problems that face us, which are complicated because in 20 years, I would like to see something very different than what is in the works now, which is the Hunger Games version of urban development. Basically, you have District 1 here, all the jobs, all the political power, all the white people, and then in the suburbs, outlying suburbs, you have the racialized suburbanization of poverty, and you have, here's the district where the people who clean hotel rooms live, and they take BART 2 hours to come here and do that, and then they leave, and they can't vote the politician out who doesn't have their back. And in this district, you have the people who play this other role in the economy, driving the cabs, like all the cab drivers in DC, for example. None of them live in DC anymore, right? And how could you possibly cobble together political power if we've been resegregated that way in the interest of the political and economic power staying in the hands of the few? It's our responsibility to think about something different, because it's very common in progressive circles to just talk about how bad things are. I realize I just did that, but it's true. And I tried to throw in the Hunger Games so you wouldn't get depressed. But we need a different way to look at change. We need to stop shrinking the meaning of change to what our current conditions can accommodate, and we need to reclaim our revolutionary imagination. It is possible to look at questions of urban development from the point of view of domestic workers and day laborers. And what's more, if we measured the outcomes of urban development on how much does it make possible the development of human beings and their full capacities, instead of how much does it develop capital, we would have a very different conversation. And most people, regardless of where they are in the political spectrum, would say, well, that's interesting. I believe in that. I just don't know that we believe in that. And I think that's the challenge before us as a movement, so that we can get in 20 years to a city that has black families, that has Latino families, that has full employment, that hosts an international programmers union that's in solidarity with the workers that clean hotel rooms, and where you really have a city that's for all of us and by all of us.
All right. Yep.
All right, Maria, always delivered with style. So next, let's hear from Neil from Shareable, just to open up the panel. And so maybe you can say a few words, as Maria did, about what you do in your organization, and then the two questions that we posed.
Great. I'm Neil Gornflow, and I'm a co-founder of Shareable, and we're a nonprofit. Our mission is to empower everyone to share for a more joyous, resilient, and equitable world. And we do that. We're 5 years old, actually, I think today, and you know, we execute on our mission in two primary ways. First is our online magazine at shareable.net, which is the most trafficked online magazine dedicated to sharing in the world. Last month we had 100,000 unique visitors come visit our site, and our editorial is focused on two things: is you know, how you can share in your everyday life, and sort of how-tos, how to do it, how to start a worker co-op, how to host a potluck or a clothing swap, how to share a car, how to share your house, and then the other thing is it's kind of case studies, like unexpected but true and proven models of how to manage our resources as a society in a fair and sustainable way. And you know, through that, it's, you know, that's how we're known for being sort of empowering and inspiring with our editorial. And then we also have embarked on doing some community organizing, and this is, you know, last year we started the Sharing Cities Network, and we get people together in cities to you know, to create strong local sharing movements and to connect different parts of the community together who may not have been connected before, to work towards the vision of a sharing city. And you know, that's a good segue into kind of what our vision is. And so a sharing city is a city as commons. It starts with a new story of what a city is. That a city isn't merely a marketplace for investors to come. to buy and sell. It's a place where we live and where we make our lives together, and we create together the things that we need, and share the things that we need to provision our lives and have a good life. And if you think of society as that there are three main ways to organize or manage our resources. There's government, there's the market, and then there's the commons. And the commons is the unexplored open avenue that we have. In some ways, we're limited about the speed and that we can get change through the market and through government. So, it's a place for citizens to directly make those changes, like starting worker co-ops. And so a city as commons, I would say there's like three main components to look at real quick. Is first that there's a revival of democracy with a small d, right? So things like participatory budgeting and open government and other innovations that can revive democracy in cities. And then once you get that, then you can mobilize, public resources for the public, right? So you can focus on things, commons-based sort of urban development, which focuses on things like schools, parks, and public transportation. There are cities in South America like Bogota, for instance, that have really focused on that and been very successful. So we can learn something about from South America and other cities. And then there's the idea of mutualizing industries that meet the basic needs of all citizens. So things like food, housing, transportation, healthcare, education. And this mutualization is something that's done voluntarily by the citizens without obstruction from the market or government, and at least that there is a kind of level playing field policy-wise that we can make that choice and mutualize the things that we need so they're owned by us directly. And that's our long-term vision towards it, and we're just getting started towards that.
So we'll turn it over to Fernando to share your perspective.
So I think I had a thought on the short term and a kind of different thought on the long term. One of the things as I was reflecting on what we'd be talking about tonight, I was thinking of the Matt Gonzalez moment. So who was around San Francisco when Matt Gonzalez was running for mayor? So to me, there was something very interesting and very different about, and I'm sorry, Juli, I hope I don't insult you, between the Matt Gonzalez moment and the Tom Amiano write-in, which was, I think, one of the Tom Amiano's write-in was probably for mayor, was probably the first time I got involved in a particular candidate election. And I think what Gonzalez represented was a moment in which those new arrivals, who might have been on Rachel's map, if Rachel had that version of the map for 1999 and 2000, who survived the dot-com bust, didn't get back in their U-Hauls and back to wherever they came from, but remained as residents and voters in San Francisco, who now had the beginnings of collective experience of being screwed over by the market, losing your IPO that had been promised you, and having to engage with the city, had to suddenly engage with labor unions and communities of color who coalesced around this particular candidate as opposed to the other candidate, and began to bring some of that innovation. And I remember just at some point, I don't know if I made it into the Gonzalez HQ. We were working out of Juli's house, I think, in Bernal. But I remember Calvin Welch coming in and saying, those people, they've got all these GIS screens all over the place, and they're running around with all this technology. I'm not sure they know how to actually talk to people to get them to vote for Matt, but they've got this really great technology around where the precincts are, and I think that one of the things that is to me has me a bit pessimistic right now is the lack of a collective struggle, of a moment in which across some of the newcomers and the old see themselves in a similar relationship to venture capital and to the corporations and to those who are trying to extract profit out of our labor, whether it is our labor within unions, within regular jobs, or within the domestic precarious work that we've suddenly turned into a profit-making machine for corporations. So I just stayed on the short term. I think others talked about the long term, but I think that the piece of that is, I think as we see the economic cycle turn, we might begin to see the possibility of engaging with some of these ideals that Neil talked about, with some of the sharing ideas that for right now I feel are still maintained at a certain level of affluence of those who have the ability to even think about or talk about sharing as a choice, as opposed to many who have been sharing since they were born because that's what you had to do to survive.
Thank you, Fernando. So, last up to answer the first question.
So I think the question is kind of our vision for the city in 20 years.
And what are the key impacts of these interactions?
Yeah. I guess what I want to say about the next 20 years is to partly repeat myself that, we're seeing these waves of development. We're in the middle. Maybe it's the peak. We're not sure of one at the moment. There will be a crash. And then there will be more and more waves. And I think to look at cities are resilient. I think during the first .com boom, there was there was a moment that was that was very similar to this one, where there was a sense of the city is transformed forever, it's done, San Francisco's over. And then there was a break in the waves, kind of. And I think what we've seen is that there is there's a persistent community response that a lot of you are a part of, and that other people are a part of, and that not to say that it's easy, but that it's perfect. It can be very chaotic, and there can be lots of disagreement about how to do it, but that there's this constant kind of re-rising of people coming together and trying to imagine a different way to have a city, a different way to do urbanism. That's part of what makes the Bay Area what it is. That eruption continues to happen, even in the face of the kind of constant eruptions of boom times. One other comment I just wanted to make is that Fernando mentioned the Whole Earth Catalog, and also the idea of, in the first tech boom, people starting to say, on the activists starting to figure out, there's this tech stuff, and maybe we could use it. And so the Whole Earth Catalog was very high tech. It was all about bringing technology to the desert to make off-grid living happen, solar power in the desert and things like that. And so there's actually a long tradition of people with an alternative vision about society that they want to live in, merging with high technology in the Bay Area. And it's happening now too. I mean, the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project is a very good example of people using some of the emerging mapping technology to demonstrate what's happening in the city. There are probably lots of other examples we could come up with, but I think that's the very best one, and I wish I had their maps that we could show right now. But so I think we're going to continue to see more of that. I don't know what happens in 20 years, but there's going to continue to be a struggle. I'm pretty sure of that.